So the topic of this presentation is how to raise kids with guns in the house. I would like to start off with some numbers to get a perspective on the near ubiquitous presence of firearms in this country. Don't mind if I look at the paper for that, because I want to get this right. There are approximately 400 million privately owned guns in America. About 7 million people are gun owners. The United States has 4% of the world's population, but about 40% of the world's privately owned firearms. Almost 50% of households and 40% of individuals own firearms in the United States. Those are just the private ones. On top of that, we can count the ones owned by businesses and government agencies. More than anywhere else in the world, it is important that we introduce our children to firearms. Even if you are a so-called anti-gunner and you never ever plan to own any guns yourself, chances are that you or your children will at some point be in a household where there are guns present. And we might not necessarily know about that. You yourself probably know this. Gun owners don't always advertise that they possess firearms. My experience has taught me that there are many, many closeted gun owners, and in every job I've ever had, about half of all my coworkers were gun owners. And I've lived in Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego, all relatively liberal cities. Imagine what this would look like in some more conservative places. Well, when it comes to our children, the focus is most often, of course, on safety. How do you present safety to your children? First and foremost, by practicing it consistently in front of them. We find an analogy with a toy such as a Nerf gun or a squirt gun or something like that. Teach our kids how you would handle that if that was a real firearm, but then let them play with it, right? An actual demonstration at the range can be very helpful with a real firearm so that they experience the noise, the recoil, and the potential destructive power that a real firearm has, depending on the target that you choose. You go plinking, you go shoot at bottles, at cans. At the range, you'll probably not be able to shoot at pumpkins, but that is something that would very accurately demonstrate the potential that the real firearm has. I have my two boys right here, Johann and Augustin. Augustin, come on up here. I want to ask you a question. This is Augustin. He's 5 years old. Augustin, what do you do when you find a gun?
Don't touch it.
And then what?
Leave the area. Tell the groom.
Perfect. That's exactly right. So my kids know all this from an early age. Johann, you're up next. Tell me about the gun safety rules. Number one.
Your finger off the trigger if you're ready to use it.
Speak up. Number two.
Obviously, I got a little bit of so you're ready to use it.
And the last one.
Obviously, you got to point in a safe direction.
That is right. And what is the safe direction?
The safe direction is the direction where accidental discharge occurs. You are not causing any unintended injury or damage.
That's exactly right. Now at home this works a little bit more fluent because he's not so nervous in front of people, but they know this from an early age. There's no hesitation here. This is what they know, this is what I've taught them, and this is what they will hopefully never ever forget. Johann, what can you tell me about accidents?
Accidents don't happen, accidents are produced.
All right. Thank you, guys. So, accidents don't happen, they are produced, right? There are many more rules that we sometimes use, but if these three rules are observed, the rest becomes sort of white noise. For example, know your target, what is beyond, treat every gun as if it's loaded, no drugs and alcohol, which for the kids hopefully doesn't apply anyway. So all these rules can be quite helpful, but those 3 rules that Johan recited there are sufficient in preventing an accident while keeping it simple for a child to understand, right? We don't want to add too much in there that gets convoluted and confusing. 3 rules, 3 simple rules that boil it down to the most essential ones. So that's when it comes to safety. There are some legal requirements that we need to observe, right? There are safe storage laws. Guns need to be unloaded and the ammo stored separately. Both guns and ammo must be locked whenever not on your person and under your control. That is something that we as the parents need to observe, obviously. That is not the responsibility of the children. And then we need to be mindful of unauthorized and prohibited persons, such as felons, certain mental health conditions, certain restraining orders. Minors, right, fall in the category of prohibited persons that are not allowed to possess firearms, but with the parent around, under our supervision, they may handle those in a safe manner. I want to talk about something that has occurred to me. That's my personal experience. I don't know how prevalent this is. I'm assuming this can happen in every household. When my oldest child was still quite young, I wanted to take a more formalized approach to firearms in the house, and I actually had to fight with my wife to teach our children about gun safety because we have quite opposing views. My wife was extremely opposed, and she's still not a fan of firearms, but because that is my lifestyle, my wife just had to put up with that, right? Our initial lessons were purely about calling out parts of the firearm. I would have my gun around, make sure it was safe, unloaded, and, safe to handle. And I would point out the parts of the gun, and my son would call out the names. That way, I was able to control his level of success because I knew exactly which parts he knew and which he didn't, and I could control how much fun he'd have with it and how successful he is at this little game. We did that for quite some time. He's really good at it. I don't know if he's ready to be a gunsmith, but I think pretty close. I practiced at home anyway an unpolitical approach with the focus on safety and handling. Let's talk a little bit about legislation versus education. This is probably where we should focus most of our attention. While I, and I'm sure most of you as well, can agree a lot of legislation, especially when it comes to preventing access and safe storage requirements, the intention of those laws is good. But we should judge those laws on the outcome rather than the intention, because they accomplish nothing but to add additional grief when there is a firearms accident in the home, especially when it involves children. We have heard earlier that accidents don't happen, they are produced. The cause of an accident is virtually always negligence and/or ignorance. Rarely do we see a serious accident caused by material failure or malfunctions, especially when it comes to accidents involving children, because by the time we even have the opportunity for malfunction, for any type of failure, the children have to be handling the firearms. And that comes after they're educated about the safety and the safe handling of firearms. So the accidents are not produced. Accidents don't happen, they're produced. And that usually happens because of a lack of education. Okay? There's no amount of laws that can prevent negligence or ignorance. It's usually a lack of education. We sometimes hear of tragic accidents where a child kills either themselves or a sibling. There are many jurisdictions where the owner of the gun, usually a parent, in a lot of cases the father, is then criminally charged because of safe storage violation. It is not uncommon for that parent then, and we've heard cases in recent weeks, to serve long time behind bars. I would like to ask the question if that is really the best course of action. This parent has just lost a child. If you ask me, that is on its own already a life sentence, right, of grief and suffering. The parent has to go to therapy for the rest of their lives. Do we need that? Is that really necessary? And what about the siblings, right? The surviving child has just lost a sibling. There's nothing more that that kid needs than both their parents around. I firmly believe that education is far more important and effective than legislation, because legislation is usually forced, whereas education happens voluntarily. So what approach do we take in the house? I think the most important thing is to normalize the presence of the firearms. You have the guns visible, you carry in the home, you let the kids participate in an age-appropriate fashion. When it comes to your maintenance, cleaning the guns, you have those out in the open. The kids know they're there. You make sure they're safe and let your kids participate in cleaning the firearms. I remember when Johan was not even a year old, he was sitting in this little, I don't know what they're called, this little rubber thing that helps the little toddlers to sit up without their neck falling over. And I had the gun on the table. And he was sitting there. He was really fascinated. He watched me. Obviously, he couldn't participate. But right out of the gate, both my kids have been exposed to firearms, and they have a very healthy respect for them. At the appropriate time, and this depends on your child's maturity, you let them handle the gun under your supervision. We know this ourselves. When we were little, we tried to explore things in the house that were off limits, right? Anything that is forbidden, we want to find out about. And if it's forbidden, we'll do it in secret. And that's a dangerous situation. So where I come from, in Germany, we don't have a Second Amendment. I did not grow up this way. This is not something that I was exposed to at an early age. When I came to America, I had to make a conscious decision that I wanted to be a gun owner. And in the early days of my gun ownership, I was self-educated before I ever took a formal class. I mean, I do have a military background, but the military training when it comes to firearms is very different than private ownership. So you go to the range with your kids, you bring an appropriate caliber. This can be a .22, it can be a BB gun, maybe even something bigger. That depends on your kids' ability, and you know your children better than I do. But I would suggest starting with something smaller rather than something big, because we don't want to scare them into starting out with a .45 or a shotgun. A lot of accidents occur also when we're scared. This is something I'm trying to teach my kid when it comes to riding a bike. You only fall because you're scared of falling. Right? If you stop being scared of falling, all of a sudden you're riding the bike. Unfortunately, that is the best way I know how to explain it. That doesn't help very much right away, but that is the concept, right? So we teach our children to safely handle fire, right? We teach them how to build a fire. We teach them not to touch the iron, to stay away from the oven. Don't stick your finger in the outlet. Don't stick a fork in the toaster. Don't put metal in the microwave. We teach our children how to safely cross the road and to stay out of the cabinet with the chemicals under the sink. We need to make the same effort with firearms. In America, even more than in most other places, we need to find the middle ground between protecting versus exposing. This is where we can loop back to what I said in the beginning. The sheer amount of firearms in this country. Your kids might end up in a place where there are firearms without you being around. And if then they are exposed to firearms, they need to know what's going on. They need to be safe, they need to be responsible, and they need to have the knowledge, the tools available for them to be safe with firearms. If you didn't grow up around guns, go get some training, both for yourself and for your children. There are many resources available. There are instructors, there is good online resources, there are YouTube videos for everything. If you don't have the budget to get formal training, but your children need to be exposed to this at one point, even if you yourself are not a gun owner. So, why do we have the guns? What's the purpose? What's your responsibility as a gun owner and citizen? And what's the Second Amendment for? When is the right time to start teaching your kids? I would say right away, as early as possible. That is the approach that I've taken, and I think that is a good way to start. Johan, do you remember the first lesson you've ever had about guns? Exactly. You were so little, you don't even remember. It's always been a part of your life. Obviously, at 10 years old, he is not allowed to handle any firearms unsupervised. But I have 100% confidence that if he ever comes across an unsecured firearm, it'll be fine. So, but before we think about the when, we should think about the why we teach about guns. I'm not talking about why as it relates to safety. Our form of government here is a constitutional republic. And no matter what anybody else tells you and how often they repeat it, we do not live in a democracy. In a democracy, the majority rules. Now, we have certain democratic elements to our republic, but it is not a democracy. In a democracy, the masses decide. If they want to take away your guns, or anything else for that matter, your bicycle, your front lawn, whatever, then that's what's happening. In a republic where our freedom is enshrined in the Constitution and protected by checks and balances, that is not possible, okay? In a way, a republic protects its citizens from its own bad decisions. And taking away our guns collectively, that is a really bad decision. Even if a majority didn't like guns, they cannot simply vote to take them. Countless Supreme Court decisions have proven that. The discussion about guns is much broader than the mechanics and the safety. We teach not just the tool, but we teach a respect for life and liberty. We teach about the responsibility that comes with being a gun owner and especially a gun user. We teach not just safety, but the purpose of the gun, standing up for your rights and, very importantly, the rights of others. I hope I've made this not too political a talk, but a philosophical one. I'm not on a mission to convert anyone into becoming a Second Amendment champion like Mike Schwartz and some of our friends here at San Diego County Gun Owners. My mission is just education. Of course, the conversation occasionally becomes political. It's unavoidable with a topic like this. Maybe you've heard the quote, "I agree with what you're saying, but I'll defend your right to say it." That's something that happens to us gun owners quite a bit. That is the type of respect for life and liberty I'm talking about. When you are a gun owner and you carry, you have to live in a life of de-escalation because you're hopefully responsible enough to know where that could lead if you engage in road rage or a drunken brawl. Gun ownership is an excellent opportunity to teach our kids what a right is and what different rights do not have different values, right? There's not one right that is more valuable than any other. If you believe that one person's right to free speech is more important than another person's right to express their religion freely, then you don't know what a right is. And by the way, the Constitution doesn't grant us any rights. It simply protects them. Our enumerated rights predate the Constitution. They're natural and inalienable rights that we all have since birth. All the rights we enjoy have their purpose. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, petitioning the government are all very powerful, but it is the Second Amendment that really guarantees all the other ones. And that is why it is listed so high on that list and why we protect it so fiercely. Because once it's gone, all the others are at peril. Maybe you know this. CCW holders, on average, commit less crime than police officers. So as gun owners, we're good citizens. We shall pass our values to our children. The United States is the only country in the world that has recognized the right to keep and bear arms. We're special in that regard because while I would say the right to self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms is universal, It is not protected in other countries the way we have done so. We have to thank our founding fathers for that wisdom. The unique freedom, but also the responsibility we have as gun owners is an excellent way to teach our kids about the special place that we have in history. So when do we teach our kids? As early as possible. What do we teach our kids? We teach them about the rights and responsibilities, even more than we teach them about safety and the mechanics, because their rights and responsibilities affect them every day for their entire lives, even if they choose not to become gun owners themselves. Why do we teach our kids? We teach them so that they can carry on our values and protect what our founding fathers have left us after we are gone. And with that, I'll come to an end. And I just want to let you all know that San Diego Firearms School, we teach children and youth groups. We're available for private classes as well as groups. By appointment, we can come to your residence. We go to the range. In any way possible, we attempt to accommodate you and your children so that your children become responsible gun owners and are safe around firearms whenever we're not around, and we give them the tools that they need in the future to be good citizens and safe and responsible gun owners. Are there any questions? One question right there. Wait for the mic.
I'm gonna hold this too. You're...
Okay, so how was your message received here in San Diego by people that may be fearful of guns?
I have taught a lot of first-time gun owners. Most everybody comes to me with a lot of curiosity. And the first lesson is never about marksmanship. The first lesson is never about hitting the bullseye. The first lesson is always about confidence and safety, obviously, but confidence. And I have never had a student that has left the range less empowered than when they got there. I've had students who fired the first shot and then shed a couple of tears because they didn't expect the reaction that the firearm gave them. But in the end, every single person, especially beginners that I've ever had, left the range smiling, feeling empowered, and I've had repeat customers that came back and said, hey, I want to do this more.